Star Trek: The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Deceptions. Chapter 9. Spinnaker sat on the edge of the table, staring suspiciously at the little CD that he'd kept in a fishbowl in his office for the last 5 months. Data had made it back more than an hour before, reporting in detail everything that had happened. The other cadets had been rescued, and Tapira and Lucas were now safely recuperating in the archaeologist's medical facility. The camp, however, was in an uproar. Everyone had gathered in Gandy's grub hole, the cafeteria building, where Spinnaker sat before them, trying to make sense of what he'd learned. "So this," he said, turning the CD over and over in his hands, "is nothing but a weapon." Regret filled his voice. "No, sir. That CD is a decorative art piece," Data corrected him. "Only the batteries are weapons." At first, Spinnaker had refused to believe any of Data's story, not because he doubted Data's word, but because he couldn't accept that his archaeological expedition had produced a discovery that might very well tear the Federation apart. He slid off the table and walked over to Pon de Bec and Pen Sazid, who had been taken into custody and who now stood by the door, their bony wrists and ankles bound. When they learned that Data had returned, they'd tried to flee. That alone was enough evidence to convince Spinnaker that the Dirondites were indeed guilty. Still, it wasn't yet crystal clear what they were guilty of. "Why don't you just tell me what you were planning?" he asked them for the umpteenth time. Tipping her strange mantis head so far to one side that she ended up looking at Spinnaker sideways, Pen Sazid replied in her tinny voice, "Under present circumstances, it is not wise for me to speak." Pon de Bec tilted his head the same way, as if such a gesture was a Dirondite expression of resistance. Data had never seen Spinnaker angry before, and the change in the man was unsettling. Normally easygoing, even playful, Spinnaker now trembled with suppressed rage, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "The cadets can take us to your cave," he warned them. "I'm sure Ponchab is there. We can stop your little scheme right now." "That is doubtful." Pen Sazid slowly, eerily tilted her head the other way. "The winds beyond camp are too strong for travel. Our ship will arrive tomorrow morning. Even if you capture Ponchab, even if you eliminate all three of us, you cannot stop a warship of the ruling house, nor are you able to call for assistance from Starfleet. We will have the CD." Spinnaker turned his back on them. "Tesh, get them out of here. Put them in the pit and post guards." The pit was the only underground facility in the camp. It was a large emergency room designed to shelter the entire dig staff from Arunu's two greatest threats, lightning storms, the likes of which had never been seen on Earth, and incredible windstorms, far more violent than the nightly northern winds. So far, neither emergency had occurred, but the pit stood ready just in case. Now it would serve as a jail. Tesh and two other diggers led their prisoners outside as the crowd anxiously murmured opinions. Fantico spoke up. "Professor Spinnaker, you must have some kind of plan in case of an outside attack." Spinnaker shook his head. "This is a scientific establishment, not a battleground." "We have had our comm satellite," said Dr. Ching, "and once a month a starship comes by. We thought that adequate." One of the diggers, a petite black-haired woman, said, "Can we hide the CD?" "Where?" asked Spinnaker. "They took Data's modified Tuketum. They can find CD anywhere now." "I regret creating such a complication," Data apologized. "Are you kidding?" Spinnaker laughed bitterly. "Data, if not for you, who knows how many CD batteries would have been smuggled out right from under our noses." No, we owe you our thanks for exposing this fiasco. He sat back down on the table. We just have to figure out what to do about it. More debate ensued, but the conclusion remained the same, even though the archaeologists had tools that could be used as weapons. They didn't have the firepower to challenge a starship, especially one loaded with armed Dirondite war guards. Wait a minute, said Fantico. If we can't fight them, maybe we can trick them. How? Asked Dr. Ching. We've got a potential secret agent in our midst. Fantico pointed at Data. Data is a lot like the Dirondites. What if he convinced them he wanted to switch sides? They'd take him into their ship, presuming that he'd be leaving with them, right? Once inside, Data could sabotage their weapons or engines or whatever he can get hold of. Everyone seemed to like the plan, but Data broke through the rising hubbub. Excuse me, everyone, please. They all stopped talking. I am afraid there is an insect in this particular ointment. My programming is not designed for deceit. I doubt whether I could successfully convince the Dirondites that I have chosen to take their side. In addition, it is wrong to lie, is it not? Fantico put her fists on her hips. You're a Starfleet cadet, mister. You'll do as ordered. That is not in debate, sir, Data replied. But the fact remains that... Sir, Zhu stepped quickly up to his team leader. If I may. Fantico, curious, nodded to him. Zhu grabbed Data's arm, the way he always did whenever he wanted the android's full attention. Data, think of it like your birthday party. I tricked you into coming to the study lounge, remember? I deceived you, but for a good purpose. This be the same idea. You've got to fool the Dirondites and get onto their ship so you can stop them from eventually waging war on the Federation. Ruse be a basic combat strategy. It be part of what you be at the Academy to learn, right? Data quickly analyzed the two situations in relation to his ethics program. He was surprised to conclude that Zhu was right. Oh, I think I understand, he said, amazed by this revelation. Fantico nodded. Good. Now all we need is some kind of explosive. The closest thing we've got are cobium charges, said Dr. Ching. The cadets had already learned that archaeologists had stopped using explosives long ago when cobium was discovered. An unstable element sensitive to sonic vibrations, cobium could be used to create controlled vibrations through sound and rock, thus loosening artifacts from the earth without the time, cost, and manpower of standard digging methods. Cobium, Spinnaker mused, nodding his head. Right. What are you going to do, vibrate them into submission? The archaeologist laughed nervously at the joke, but Fantico frowned. No, Professor, but if put in the right place, say their engine room, its vibrations might disrupt their instruments so badly the engines won't operate. It might take out other control systems as well. But how can Data get a cobium charge onto their ship? Zhu asked. The Dirondites be not stupid. If they do let him aboard, they'll scan him first. Spinnaker heaved a frustrated sigh. Well, so much for that idea. Not necessarily. At those words, everybody looked at Data. How big is a cobium unit? Dr. Ching made a fist with her hand. It's in a box about this big that's designed to amplify the cobium's vibrations, but the actual mechanism is smaller than one of your comm badges. Even so, it's big enough to alert even the simplest scanner. Again, not necessarily. Lifting his arm, Data rolled up his sleeve. As everyone curiously watched, he tapped the synth skin of his forearm, and an access panel popped open, revealing a maze of circuitry and tiny blinking lights inside. Perhaps I can hide the cobium unit in this gap between the servos of my forearm. I will have to be careful not to use this arm while the device is there, but the Dirondites should not be able to detect it. And if they do, Zhu said, they'll think it be part of your own systems. Clever Data. See, I knew you'd catch on. Then you'll do it? Spinnaker asked hopefully. Data nodded. I will do my best. Dear Diary, after replaying my memory record of Pon Shab's instructions to his fellow scientists in the cave, I have been able to determine the approximate landing site for the Dirondite ship Kemp. I am now en route on foot to the cave where I and my teammates escaped. I will approach the Kemp from that direction so that the Dirondites will think I alone have escaped their trap. What I am about to do may save the Federation, as Professor Spinnaker says, but I continue to debate whether or not I will succeed. The odds are not in my favor, yet I must try. Sincerely, Data. After jogging for 20 minutes, Data reached the cave where the cadets had emerged the night before. From that point, he continued north, heading for the mountains but angling west, so that he'd find the valley that Spinnaker said would be the best place for a warship to land and remain concealed. Fantico had told Data not to bathe or change his uniform so that he'd look as if he'd just come from the cave-in. Glancing down at himself as he jogged, the android figured that his appearance, at least, would support the story he planned to tell the Dirondites. He was a filthy mess. At Zhu's suggestion, Data had also discarded his oxygen mask. The more machine-like he looked and acted, the more the Dirondites might believe his story. Data had left camp before dawn. He reached the target valley just as the sun was beginning to rise. Sitting down next to a huge boulder, he waited, watching the shadowy pit of the valley slowly reveal its craggy, barren surface in the sun's growing light. He could only hope that this, indeed, would be the Kemp's touchdown point. He didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, he noticed a tiny dot of silver high in the sky. The dot descended, growing larger and larger until it resolved into a spaceship. It was far smaller than Data had expected, maybe the size of a commercial warp shuttle, but its design spoke volumes about its purpose. This was a vessel of destruction, bristling with weaponry, sensor arrays, and heavy-duty deflector dishes. Data waited until a ground transport appeared, presumably to travel to the cave where the stolen Ceti were waiting. It dropped down out of an open port in the ship's belly and gently lowered itself on hover jets to the dirt. After it skimmed away, Data rose to his feet and began walking toward the main ship. Before he'd gotten within shouting distance, a troop of 7-foot-tall armored war guards materialized around him, rifle-like weapons drawn, their bony, triangular faces without expression. Identify, one of them commanded. I am Data. No doubt Pon Shab told you about the Starfleet cadets who discovered your plans. I was, one of those cadets. The war guards took aim. Wait, I wish to join you, Data said hastily. Explain. Data gave his speech exactly as rehearsed. While it is true that I first attempted to stop your plans, I have reconsidered my position. Every cadet but myself was killed in the cave-in arranged by Pon Shab. As I dug my way out, I had time to analyze your people's philosophy versus that of the Federation. I find your methods of operation far more suitable to my programming and offer my services to your cause. You are the android? Affirmative. Without any signal that Data could detect, the war guards all lowered their weapons. The only one to have spoken so far tapped a communications device on his armor, spoke rapidly into it, then slapped a small metal disc onto Data's shoulder that stuck fast to the fabric of his uniform. As Data was about to ask what it was, he felt the unmistakable sensation of a transporter beam grab him. Chapter 10. Data started to rematerialize, but something stopped the process. Hanging in the helpless limbo of partial solidity, the android suspected he was being scanned. His suspicion was confirmed when the words, "Negative, Gilpon," drifted by. Another voice, deep and equally empty of emotion, responded, "Very well." The transporter finished reassembling the scattered atoms of Data's body, and he found himself standing on what he assumed to be the bridge of the Kempt. While the ship itself had been smaller than he'd expected, the bridge was bigger than he'd expected. 5 Dirondite officers were at their stations, plus Data himself, 2 war guards, and the captain in his center seat. The captain stood up, towering a good 2 feet over Data. "You will address me as Gilpon Ladak. You are aboard the warship Kempt. You will retain your transporter tag." Data realized that he meant the disc stuck to his uniform. "Very well, Gilpon Ladak. I am Data." "I know who you are and why you have come." The captain leaned over Data as if to intimidate him, tipping his mantis head so that one bulging eye stared down into Data's upturned face. "Explain how it is possible for an android programmed by Starfleet to reject Starfleet." "I was not programmed by Starfleet," Data answered simply and truthfully. "My creator gave me a free will." He paused, then added, "I see now that it is more advantageous to serve you." As Data spoke, he kept his pupils focused on the Dirondite captain, but his optical sensors were busy examining everything he could take in by peripheral vision. He needed to locate the engineering console, but he had no idea how to identify it amidst a crowd of alien machinery. The captain, unaware of his guest's secret scrutiny, continued his interrogation. "We now have the means to smash your Federation. What can you offer to aid in this effort?" Data had anticipated that question and had formulated an answer designed to target the Dirondite's specific interests. "Aside from my enhanced physical strength, my memory banks contain a wealth of Federation records," he said, continuing to scan the bridge. "I have detailed information about technologies, cultures, star charts." "Weaponry and deployment?" "Affirmative." "Tactics?" "Affirmative." Gilpon Ladak considered. "What assurance do we have that you will not change loyalties again?" Once again, Data had an answer ready. "Yours is a superior society. It would be impractical for me to remain in league with inferiors." Just as Data finished speaking, he spotted it, a schematic of the warship on what he presumed was the engineering control console. Data's optical sensors quickly magnified the image so that he could locate main engineering, but as the shape of the schematic became clear, the android felt a jolt of surprise. It wasn't the same ship that had landed on Arunu's surface. Gilpon Ladak's bulging eyes were studying the living machine before him. "We accept you," he announced bluntly. Data hardly noticed that he'd successfully completed the first phase of his mission. Instead, he blurted, "Excuse me, Gilpon Ladak, but am I not aboard the ship I observed landing on the surface of Arunu?" Gilpon Ladak made a strange clicking sound deep in his throat. If the Dirondites possessed emotions, Data would have suspected that it was a form of laughter. "No, android. The vessel on the surface is a shuttle. The Kempt is in orbit." Before Data knew how to react, the alien captain declared, "You are now a subject of the ruling house. You will serve us best by giving your life to our robotics experts. Your memory core will be dumped into our systems, and you will be disassembled and analyzed so that we may construct more of your kind. Confine him." At their captain's order, the guards raised their weapons. Data stepped back in alarm, only to bump up against a bulkhead. "Wait, this is not what I—" His words were cut short as he suddenly dematerialized. This time, Data rematerialized in a bare room, not a brig cell, but efficiently sealed nonetheless. There simply was no door. The android stood alone, unmoving, realizing that despite his success at deception, everything had gone wrong. He'd misinterpreted Ponshab's words from the start, presuming that the Kemp itself would land on Arunu. He wasn't on the surface anymore. He was aboard a ship in orbit. If he sabotaged the ship, he'd never escape. If he didn't sabotage the ship, he faced disassembly by the Dirondites. No matter what he did, his fate was sealed. "Cold, hard facts, Data," came Fantico's voice from his memory banks. "Cold, hard facts." Those facts also told him that his life, though precious and unique, was nothing compared to the billions who would suffer if the Dirondites' plan succeeded. There was only one thing to do. He would complete his mission, whatever the cost. After all, he still had the cobium charge. If his life had to end, he would end it by stopping the Dirondites. Data began a swift examination of the bulkheads. They were solid, but the deck above was composed of panels that looked as if they could be opened. However, there was no way for him to reach up that far. Kneeling down, Data opened his forearm access panel and removed the cobium charge so that he could regain the full use of that arm. After stuffing the charge into his pocket, he turned his attention to the metal deck plates beneath him. No human or even Dirondite could have lifted the plates. They were a meter square and weighed more than 200 pounds each. But after patiently pushing his fist down near the edge of one, Data managed to dent it enough to cause the edge to buckle up. Prying his fingers underneath the tiny opening, he lifted the plate up enough to grasp it firmly, and quietly moved it aside. Data had never seen a Dirondite ship before, but it was practically a given that all starships contained crawl spaces between bulkheads. Such spaces offered the only way to gain access to the maze of wiring and circuitry that wove its way throughout the hull. But Data was no Dirondite engineer. As he lowered himself into the crawl space, he realized that one wrong move, one touch of the wrong circuit or power transformer, and he could fry his own systems to a crisp. On the other hand, if he could locate a main transformer, he could place a cobium charge directly on it. If he was lucky, the vibrations would affect a crucial system. If he was luckier still, the results would disable the ship. As he crawled carefully between decks, Data internally analyzed the Kemp schematic that he'd obtained from the bridge. Main engineering was located on aft deck 7, but that precious information was useless now. Without knowing exactly where he was at the moment, how could he know which direction to go to get to aft deck 7? All he knew for certain was that the loading of the CD wouldn't take much longer. As soon as the shuttle returned, the Kemp would leave orbit. After tedious maneuvering around glowing junction boxes and blinking access panels, Data elbowed his way up to a long, bulky apparatus that looked as if it might be a Dirondite version of a main transformer. There was no way to be sure, but he had little time to consider the matter. Pulling the cobium charge from his pocket, Data wedged it firmly into a groove in the unit's containment module. Then he set it for maximum pulse and activated it. Unable to calculate how long it would take the cobium to build up a strong vibration, Data figured he might have enough time to attempt escape, however slim his chances. First he put some distance between himself and the transformer, and then he lifted up the bulkhead panel in front of him. Sliding it aside, he dropped through the ceiling onto the deck below. "We have him," reported a war guard, showing Data forward. Gilpon Ledoc gazed down at the android. "What have you done?" he demanded, his emotionless tone still conveying a sense of urgency. Data had made the mistake of dropping down right into the middle of a security detachment. More ironic than that, the security detachment had been on its way to Data's confinement room because sensors indicated that he'd disappeared. Data had been recaptured and now stood on the bridge once again. But the bridge wasn't a scene of humming efficiency anymore. Lights blinked wildly. A red alarm light was flashing like a panicked heartbeat, and the officers were scrambling at their controls. "What have you done, android?" Gilpon Ladok repeated. In truth, Data couldn't answer the question, because he really wasn't sure what he'd done. For all he knew, the cobium charge was now causing the shipboard plumbing to back up. Gilpon Ladok took a threatening step toward him just as an officer reported, "We cannot pinpoint the cause, Gilpon. If the disruption continues to build, we will lose control of the plasma injector." If Data could have gasped in shock, he would have. By accident, he'd placed the cobium charge on one of the worst places possible, a transformer leading directly to a major component of the warp engines. If the Dirondites lost control of the plasma injector, the engines would overload and the ship would explode. "One last time, android," said Gilpon Ladok urgently. "What have you done?" Before Data could answer, the officer said, "Gilpon, we must evacuate now." At those words, all heads turned to the captain, whose face remained passive, as if nothing at all were amiss. But the force with which he grabbed Data and literally threw him across the bridge revealed the captain's opinion of the present circumstances. "Order immediate evacuation of all decks. Use the transporters. Leave the android aboard." And with that, he entered the turbo lift. After activating the ship-wide evacuation signal, the other officers followed. The turbo lift door closed, and Data, once again, was alone. He picked himself up from the floor where he landed and analyzed his predicament. An uncontrolled flow of plasma into the warp engines would overload them very quickly. He might have 2 minutes, maybe 3, before they exploded. He ran to the turbo lift and, with effort, pried the doors apart. The empty shaft yawned below, dark and silent. Maybe he could climb down to the deck where the transporter was located. But what deck would that be? Data didn't know. There wasn't enough time to search the whole ship. He had to find another way to escape. Then he remembered the Dirondite transporter tag still stuck to his uniform. Twice the device had remotely activated the shipboard transporter and locked it onto his signal. If he could figure out a way to trigger it himself, the transporter might automatically beam him to the last programmed destination, that of the evacuating crew. He had no idea where that might be, but in less than a minute, anywhere would be better than the bridge of the Kemp. He had to rip his uniform sleeve to get the thing off. Like a Starfleet comm badge, it was a round disc that opened up to reveal tiny circuitry, some of which Data recognized from the 2 Kedem. Being practical people, the Dirondites apparently believed in using standardized components. As the bulkheads around him began to rumble ominously, Data carefully pressed his thumbnail down on the tag's signal relay circuits, effectively shorting out the command contacts. The device activated, and just before the bridge burst into a ball of flame, he dematerialized. Chapter 11. The next thing Data knew, he was back in the cavern where the cadets had first discovered the Dirondite scientists with their stolen CD. He was also facing Gilpon Ladok, who had wrapped his strong, bony fingers around Data's throat the second Data was fully materialized. "I do not know how you escaped, android, but you will not escape this time," the Dirondite threatened. Data didn't move. He could easily overcome Gilpon Ladok, but not the rest of the Kemp crew, all of whom stood facing him, weapons drawn, just waiting for him to give them an excuse to shoot. The Kemp's transporter must have been set to these coordinates in order to beam up the scientists ahead of the CD shipment. Instead, Data's tamperings had resulted in the crew, along with Data himself, beaming down to the cavern. "Stop! Let go of him now!" Fantico stepped out of hiding, wielding a rifle-type weapon that Data recognized as one of the archaeologist's sonic drill guns. Set to maximum radius, it made an effective weapon. In response, every war guard who'd been aboard the Kemp trained its weapon on Fantico. "Drop 'em, boys!" Spinnaker rose up from behind a stalagmite as Professor Tesh and several other archaeologists appeared from other hiding places. All had sonic drill guns aimed and ready. These drills are set for maximum radius, Spinnaker warned. We can wipe you out with a single combined burst. Stalemate, gentlemen. Gilpon Ladok maintained his hold on Data, who remained perfectly still. The war guards, taking their cue from their commander, maintained their aim on Fantico. You would not risk Starfleet cadets, the Dirondite captain stated flatly. Especially the android. Afraid I would, answered Spinnaker. Sorry, Data, no hard feelings. No feelings at all, sir, Data replied, presuming that the professor was engaged in his own deception, though he wasn't altogether sure. Gilpon Ladok twisted his mantis head back and forth, evaluating the situation. You would not risk a diplomatic situation by firing on me or my fellows. Surrender, and we will not fire upon you. No. Instead, you'll just take a few CD and possibly start a galactic war? Spinnaker smiled grimly. I'm willing to risk a little diplomatic upheaval. What are you willing to risk? Slowly, Gilpon Ladok released his grasp on Data's neck. The war guards dropped their weapons. Even though they far outnumbered their foes, the Dirondites knew that a massacre would lead to a full Starfleet investigation. Dironda would face the Federation's wrath without even gaining one CD for its troubles. Their plan was ruined. Violence would prove impractical and most inefficient at this point. Zhu appeared from behind Fantico, and the two cadets began gathering up the Dirondites' weapons as the archaeologists, keeping aim with their drill guns, covered them. I am very, very glad to see you, Data, Zhu said as he tossed disruptor after disruptor into a far corner of the cavern. I be very, very glad to be back, Data responded. However, I am somewhat confused. How... Did we know to be here? Fantico grinned. It's a long story. But first, let's get these guys disarmed and secured. Dear Diary, I believe it is safe to say that the Dirondite crisis is over. I consider myself most fortunate to have escaped the destruction of the Kempt. The Dirondite crew was able to escape in time as well. I also consider myself fortunate to be part of my particular xenoethnography team. Despite the windstorm last night, Cadets Fantico and Luinagabidid convinced the archaeologists to travel to the Dirondite secret cavern in an attempt to catch Ponchab by surprise. Not only did they succeed in their endeavor, they were still present when the Kempt's ground transport arrived, and later when I and the Kempt's crew made an emergency beam down. Armed with sonic drill guns, the archaeologists captured the ground transport and were later able to surround the Kempt's crew before they fully materialized. All of the Dirondites have been placed in the pit. As Professor Spinnaker describes it, it's a tight fit down there, but it is the only secure holding area available. Among Ponchab's supplies hidden in the cavern was a high-powered transmitter he used to communicate with the ruling house of Dironda. Professor Spinnaker has used this unit to send a message to Starbase 25. A starship is on its way. Sincerely, Data. 4 days later, back at Starfleet Academy, Data was called into Admiral Burke's office. When he arrived, he found Zhu, Tapira, Lucas, and Fantico already there. Tapira's arm had been healed by an Academy doctor, and Lucas was nearly recovered as well. Cadet Data, said Moody, I thought you'd like to know that I've just received word from Arunu. Your modified 2-Ketum has been used by Spinnaker's people to locate more than 20 psychic dumps on the main Arunuan continent, all with broken CD batteries inside. And Cadet Tapira, thanks to your unintended contact with one of the batteries, Professor Spinnaker was able to convince 2 Vulcan Kolinar masters to travel to Arunu and examine these sites. They were able to safely touch the battery remains, and the impressions they received allowed them to unravel the mystery of Arunu. It seems, cadets, that the Arunuan people destroyed themselves. Everyone but Tapira reacted with surprise, even Data. How, sir? He asked. Burks looked grave as he explained. The art form known as tsidi, which contained pleasurable emotions for entertainment purposes, eventually led to a cultural practice known as sidadu. It was a ceremony in which the Arunuans tried to cleanse themselves of all negative emotion by transferring it into large, specially designed tsidi, which they then buried, thinking it cleverly disposed of. But they underestimated the power of the psychic energy they'd trapped, and when an earthquake broke the tsidi in several of the dump sites, it caused a chain reaction that destroyed them all. The energy was released, and the Arunuans and their world were completely wiped out. For all of his speculation about why the amazing Arunuan people had disappeared, self-destruction had never occurred to Data. He had wondered if they had warred against each other, using tsidi batteries as weapons. His Federation history class had already studied several cultures that had destroyed their own planets by war. Even Earth had teetered on the brink of nuclear destruction in the 20th century. Data had also considered the possibility that the Arunuans had been invaded, and that the tsidi batteries had been a last-ditch attempt to stop the enemy. He'd never considered that planet-wide destruction had been the result of an accident. "Cadet Fantico," said Burks, interrupting Data's thoughts. "Yes, sir," Fantico responded. "You will receive a special citation in your records for excellent leadership during the Arunu events. Cadets Data, Tapira, Whitlock, and Lanuidabid, you will receive citations for bravery. Professor Jeffrey Spinnaker is quite impressed with all of you. So am I." Before the cadets became further embarrassed, Burks dismissed them. "Oh, one more thing, Cadet Data." "Yes, sir," Data said, remaining behind as the others filed out. Admiral Burks stood up from his chair. "Cadet, I've been given authorization to grant you access to the advanced research labs here at the Academy. Several of the professors would like your input on their projects, and you're encouraged to continue your studies of Dirondite technology. Now that they've been identified as being a potential threat to the Federation, we need all the insight we can get. You have a surprising understanding of the Dirondites and their technology." Although Burks had just given him a great compliment, the very thought of being compared to the Dirondites created a sense of unease in Data. He attempted a casual shrug. "That may be true, sir," he said, "but I am pleased to note many differences between myself and the Dirondites, differences that I hope will never change." Burke smiled and dismissed the android, who left his office to hurry after his friends.